Yeah, last week somebody asked me a question. Brian, what do you think? Shelby did.
American gangsters, 'cause we speak bold, ain't tripping on the haters. It could take freedom from a cold dead hands. We're locked and loaded for the last dance. 'Cause we're the new American gangsters, ready to die for this man.
Hello and welcome, everyone. We have a very special guest joining us today. I would say the top conservative reporter in the state of Arizona, Rachel Alexander. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us.
I write about you guys. Fun that
Don't say I would say the top because on Twitter, the number one news source in the world, she is the highest rated. She has the most followers of any other reporter in the state of Arizona. Right? Isn't that true? Right.
algorithm.
Well, thanks to free speech and people wanting to read good, informative news. Right? Not fake news. Right. Yeah.
I think we're losing your mic. So hold on just a second. We're going to get Rachel's mic going.
Well, while we're doing that, I want to let the world know that one of my favorite senators in the entire state of Arizona's husband is here. Hal, how are you, Hal? And we have Senator Wendy Rogers in studio, my favorite senator in the state of Arizona. And we got big things coming from Senator Rogers and Hal in the future, right? Huh. All right. So we good to go with Rachel?
Absolutely.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All
We're good to
right.
go. So what are we talking about today, Shelby?
Well, so one thing that we've recognized in this election integrity battle is that there is a bigger and larger operation at hand that is trying to stifle the voices of the American people, but not just the voices of the American people, but to actually infiltrate the judicial system and start a narrative that has been counterproductive to us, including attacks on our conservative attorneys and predisposing judges to false information.
Right.
So I think one of the most important reasons why we have Rachel here today is Rachel was kind of an early target of this movement to eliminate her ability to practice law and to represent the people. And so she's been profoundly impacted by this. And I think the people need to hear her story.
Right. Right. Well, Rachel, we're talking about lawfare. There was a lot of what she said is lawfare, right? What do you define lawfare as? You're a victim of lawfare. What do you consider it to be?
So I usually describe it as the weaponization of the legal system to basically target your enemies.
Right.
And for the most part, it involves politics. Now, I believe lawfare can be broader than just politics, but we've mostly seen it in that context. The left using it to target conservative attorneys, other conservatives, and, now leading to prosecution. Back in the day when they came after me, it was just coming after my bar license. Now it's expanded to all this prosecution, and thanks to it happening to Trump and his attorneys and his associates, people know about it and they can't hide it and sweep it under the rug like they did back with me.
Right. Well, I define in State Bar of Arizona. You're probably watching. What we're talking about here is a public policy debate, because this is a huge public policy issue that needs to be addressed. And Wendy's here. Our state legislature can participating in addressing this issue in the future. But we're having a public policy debate about what I define as lawfare, which is a systemic attack, right, by one branch of government against another branch of government to exert its authority. For example, the systemic attack of members of the national security state against the judiciary nationally and in states like Arizona, which happens to be a swing state, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about how that attack was launched against the state of Arizona in the run-up to the 2020 election. And so the way I view it is it's this systemic effort, right? Y'all, do you know my favorite two legal words?
Oh, let's hear them.
You don't know?
It's not ringing a bell. I read about you a lot, but...
What about you, Shelby? You know?
May and but?
Nope. You got one right.
But
and however. Right? And so what is lawfare as a systemic attack against our judicial branch of government, right? It's an attempt to eliminate the but, the however, right? So if you're a plaintiff, Rachel, you file suit against me saying, "Oh, you hit me," right? What do I have the right to do?
Well, you're supposed to be able to respond, but as we know now, these corrupt judges just dismiss bogus cases. They dismiss them on bogus reasons. You don't have standing. You filed it too late. The doctrine of lashes. You don't even get to respond anymore.
Right. But I should be able to say, but, or however, Rachel, I did hit you, but you were rushing at my head to crush it in with a crowbar. Right? And so if we deny the but, the however, then one ideology, right, this big deep state ideology governs all law. And I ask you guys this question: if that is the case, if that's the case, are we any different than the communist Chinese? Are we any different than the former Union Soviet Socialist Republic? Right? Where they had their one-party state, they had their judicial systems that were a reflection of the Communist Party and that one ideology. They didn't allow a but or however, did they?
Well, and I keep saying, I wrote this article called "Rogue Judges Have Become a Panel of Fascists Running the Country," because that's what's happening. There's just a few people in the legal system that are on the left, and they control the outcomes of all these cases, who can file, who's legit, who's not. And they're throwing out President Trump's actions. So I think they are a panel of fascists. There is very similarities. And 10 years ago, I would not have called the left fascist. Now I do.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I read an article today in the Big Beautiful Bill. Is that what it's called?
The Big
Beautiful Bill?
Yeah.
Right. The Big Beautiful Bill. An Obama-appointed judge struck down part of the bill. Did you hear that?
You told me that right before I got here.
Yeah, right before you got here. They struck down the provisions denying Planned Parenthood U.S. taxpayer dollars, right? Now, and so now it's not just going after the imperial executive, right? It's going after Congress itself. And so, we had that recent Supreme Court decision that said, you, Justice, want, to attack an imperial executive by becoming, an imperial judiciary. And is that, you think, what's sort of happening?
Right. What I hate is how you have all these, judges uniparty coming out saying the Trump administration or, the Republicans are destroying the rule of law.
Right.
That's so Orwellian. It's the other way around.
Right.
These fascist judges are the ones destroying the rule of law.
Right. Right.
Well, they've been doing that for quite some time. If you think about it, I mean, they really have been legislating from the bench. They've been taking authority that belongs to good senators like Senator Rogers and our House of Representatives at the local level all the way up to the federal level. And they're trying to reinterpret law instead of reading the plain language.
Right.
You two are the ones with the law license, but I think there's something to be said that when the language is plain and clear, there is no intent required, right? But it appears that they're trying to say that language is interpretable at all costs and under any circumstance. And that that's where we get dangerous precedents set in the court.
Well, and that's that's been the historical distinction between, strict constructionists and liberals, typically.
Living constitution.
Right.
Which means no constitution. Interpret it any way you want.
Right.
Everything's gray.
Right.
Nothing's black and white.
And that the meaning of words changes over time, and that should be reflected in how we read the law, right? And so I've talked a lot about how they've really actually flipped language on its head by redefining several words, what it means to be a terrorist, right? Terrorism. It's no longer people who go out and bomb buildings to achieve a political end, right? It's people who go criticize their school boards.
Pro-life activists.
Pro-life activists, yeah. And so they've altered those definitions. They've altered definition of what democracy itself is, right? Because they believe that democracy is the end result of the political system as opposed to an input to the political system. And that's why they're so insistent that we rely on bureaucrats to tell us who won our election, right? But now let's talk about your experience for a little bit. Why are you not practicing right now?
Okay, so I'll try to keep it a little short because it's kind of a long story. But basically, I was hired as a deputy county attorney, special assistant under former Maricopa County Attorney Andrew Thomas. And as you guys who've lived in Arizona for years remember, he was a very proactive conservative. He got 4 illegal immigration initiatives passed with over 70% voter approval, including no bail for illegal immigrants who commit serious crimes. Well, he discovered that after that initiative got passed, the Maricopa County Superior Court judges were circulating a memo instructing each other not to enforce that new law. So he held a press conference and he denounced the judges. Well, there's a really vague Arizona bar ethics rule that says attorneys can't criticize judges. So they came after him on that. And then we had some other corruption going on with the Maricopa County supervisors. One of them, for example, former supervisor Don Stapley, he raised $70,000 in a campaign where we had no opponent, and he had spent pretty much the entire $70,000 on luxury personal items. So we tried to prosecute him over that. Well, the judges would not go ahead with the prosecutions because they were having a Taj Mahal $350 million court tower built for them that the county supervisors had authorized and voted for in the middle of a recession, no less. And this court tower had penthouse, private robing rooms for the judges, travertine, marble, porcelain. I mean, the best our taxpayers' dollars can buy. In cash, too. So in case the economy got worse, there was nothing we could do. So we couldn't get anywhere going after them. So my former boss, representing Sheriff Arpaio, filed a racketeering lawsuit against the county supervisors and the judges. And he realized since this other prosecutor, Lisa Obashan, was handling the prosecutions, he thought, well, maybe I should have a civil attorney, someone on the other side, put their name on and do the racketeering case. So he asked me to do it. So after the racketeering case was filed, I became the lead attorney, and we worked out a deal with the Department of Justice where we thought they were going to take over the case, so we withdrew the lawsuit. That was my entire role. My name was merely on a lawsuit for a couple of months, and then the lawsuit was retracted. But because of that, they came after me. They also came after Thomas. They also came after the other prosecutor, Lisa Obashan, and they held this disciplinary trial for 2.5 months, live streamed against us. We were infamous all over the state, and they disbarred both Thomas and Obashan, and then me, they suspended my law license for 6 months.
Now, the key to getting it back is paying all 3 of your costs and fees,
They told
correct?
me when I applied to get back in after 6 months, they said, nope, you don't get back in until you pay $101,000, the cost of the disciplinary trial against you and your two superiors.
Right.
So I haven't been able to come up with the $101,000.
Right.
And they haven't either. And so I've just been sitting here suspended since 2012.
Yeah. Well, that sucks. And just so that people know what we're talking about, right? That's called joint and several liability, right?
Correct.
And so if you got multiple defendants in a lawsuit, they can be found severally liable, correct? And that means that each one's responsible for their share, their apportioned share, right? If it's joint and several, they can hold one individual responsible for the entirety of the judgment, correct?
Yes, and I have to add, even more egregious, if you look at attorneys who are disbarred, they end up with like $2,000 in disciplinary costs. That's it, right? But for us, they made us a big show trial. It was called the biggest disbarment trial in the entire history of the United States. Yeah. They flew in all these Colorado attorneys, and they made us pay for them. Wow. Even though we had an agreement, the bar attorney sent us an email. We still have it that says we will not charge you for all those extra out-of-state costs, the plane, the nice Biltmore hotel, the meals. They lied. They turned around and they charged us the whole $101,000 anyway. Complete violation of equal protection.
Oh, all right. Well, I there's a GoFundMe ad to support you, isn't there?
Yeah, this really neat guy who's been looking into election integrity named Shiloh Marks started one.
You want to do a plug for it real quick?
Go ahead. Where can they find that?
I mean, he just started it at GoFundMe. I think you look up my name, Rachel Alexander, you'll find it. He's trying to raise the $101,000 so I can get back into the bar.
Right. But we have you at least as the number one journalist in the state of Arizona, right? Yeah.
Well, somebody needs to write about all the legal stuff because you bar attorneys who still have a bar license, you can't say the stuff that I say or they will disbar you. So I'm in a very unique position. It's probably better that I'm out of the bar because who else would be, saying all the stuff that I do.
Right.
Well, and I think that's where we're heading here today, right? Is the fear that the bar has put into these attorneys, using you and others as precedents, that is prohibiting their ability to fully support and defend their clients. They're unable to actually do their job because their hands are being tied out of fear that they'll lose their license if they go all in on a situation, especially when it comes to going up against a big superpower like the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, or dealing with issues like election integrity. And or even the judiciary itself. Attorneys don't feel free to take those cases, and the American people are the ones suffering because they are not getting proper legal representation out because attorneys are running scared. And I think this is something really important, and I'm not an attorney, so I can say this as a citizen. I talk to people all across this country in the election integrity fight. Most of the swing states, probably 35 out of the 50 states, and the number one issue they all have, we can't get an attorney. We have the evidence, we've done the work, we're having to go pro se, and we're having to represent ourselves. We don't know what we're doing because we cannot find an attorney in our state to take our cases.
Well, and the problem with that is, and this isn't a criticism of the court itself, but if you are a pro se in a court of law, states like state of Arizona hold you to the standard of an attorney, right? So they hold you to that high standard. And so if you don't know what you're doing because you're a pro se, then there's a greater risk that you're going to get booted out of court because you're not pleading what you need to be pleading, things of that nature, right? And so, that's just the way courts function, right? Because if they cut pro se's slack, then everybody
they think they'll get flooded with pro se plaintiffs.
Right, and that's part of the problem because they would get flooded with pro se plaintiffs, and then the judge gets put into a position where the judge has to sort of work with this one party over another and say, well, maybe you should plead this, maybe you should plead that, right? And completely an improper role to be putting our judges in, which is exactly why Susan Spalding and her partner Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker attacked our court. That's exactly why they used the national security apparatus to come to the swing state of Arizona and to launch their attack on our court. Right? Do we want to watch the first video?
I think we should. I think it'll set the stage for what we want to talk about. Because you're exactly right. They knew that if they could influence the judiciary, if they could get in there and do this coaching and training and influence the judiciary,
Right.
that we would be exactly in this position. And again, I cannot stress enough, this is an American problem. This isn't, as much as I love you both and I'm sorry about what happened to you, this isn't just about our attorneys. So for those of you that are out there saying, well, I don't have sympathy for these attorneys, this is about the American people. It's the American people that are suffering because they are not getting full and equal protection of law. They are not getting the opportunity to the representation they deserve. And this apparatus has been designed for that, to attack the American people, to attack conservative ideology, and to control the narrative. So the attorneys are just a mechanism that they are using to lodge this attack on the people, but it's not just about the attorneys.
Right. Well, and it reminds me that, I was watching, it's funny, the State Bar, if you go by a CLE on its website, they've got an election refresher that they did. It took place on the exact same day that we were doing trial number 2 in Lake v. Richer, right? And so, they have Adrian Fontes, and he speaks it, and he basically, has all kinds of glowing words about democracy, while he says, but the people who run our elections, they're the boss. They're the ones who have the say, right? Trust your unelected bureaucrats. And then he basically says, if you challenge elections, you're a fascist. Right. They start the name calling, and then they bring up the sanctions against conservative attorneys. And he's doing this standing behind a podium emblazoned with the State Bar of Arizona's logo. What message would that send to you if you were a young lawyer, Rachel?
I mean, I would be absolutely terrified at that point. And I mean, they know what they're doing. When they came after me, they did it to hold me up as an example. Watch out, or we're going to destroy you if you do the same thing. And so now I joke and I say every conservative election lawyer I know in Arizona has either been disciplined, is in the process of being disciplined, or has bar complaints that they are investigating against them.
Right. Well, and we're going to talk about sort of globally what sort of happened and how Arizona as a swing state got sucked into that. But let's watch the first video. And I believe this is
Dean,
Elizabeth.
let me
Riskov,
start
however
with you.
Say her name, Parker.
Do you think Russian disinformation is a serious national security threat?
Well, let me not answer that immediately directly, but give you a little bit of history. Suzanne and I, in 2016, as the video indicates, were watching what was going on with the elections. And when Suzanne left Homeland Security to go to CSIS, where I joined her, we began to wonder, what do we see that might target the other fragile part of our democracy based heavily on trust, i.e., the judicial system?
Yeah, a couple of very important things she says here. Now, this is a forum that takes place in Arizona, and it's very much a public policy debate like we're having here, right? And that was Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker. Now, those of you who don't know who she is, she was a CIA attorney for a very long time, and Susan Spalding, one of my least favorite people on this fucking
Tell us how
planet.
you really feel.
Right? Susan Spalding was one of her underlings at the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, we've played a lot of video on Susan Spalding in her own words on this show, right? One of the ones we've recently played was Susan Spalding saying, oh, God, which video was it? We've done so many. But she's saying she's watching inaugural day, right? 2017. And she was dismayed, right? Because Donald Trump's being sworn into office, right? This is her former boss at the CIA. This is who she works with, right?
Right.
Now, it's also key that she says, oh, when Susan Spalding left the National Security Agency and went to work for CSIS. That's very important for people to remember because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But let's go to video number 2 really quickly.
Another question, Tina?
Actually, this is the last communication from the audience, unless there's something else. This is a point of information from Judy Perry Martinez, the former ABA president. She wants to convey that in 2019, at the request of ABA leadership, the National Conference of Bar Presidents, which contains leadership from over 300 bar associations, featured an article by the ABA Standing Committee on Law and National Security and Suzanne Spalding on the threat to the courts. And there have been NCVP programming to educate bar leaders on the threats to.
Right. Okay, so the first video. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The courts. She just wanted to let us know.
Well, and
Thank
she
you,
should know too that in fact the work that Suzanne and I are doing with CSIS involves the Standing Committee on Law and National Security. So we've had a partnership that's been very productive, I think.
All right. So, you know, the ABA folks.
Right.
Well, you know what the ABA is, don't you?
Oh, I've written plenty about the ABA.
Well, tell the people, what is the ABA?
So it might not be mandatory, but it's more powerful than people realize. It's the American Bar Association, and while in order to practice law, you don't have to be a member, you have to be a member of your state bar, generally in most states. The American Bar Association produces draft ethics rules that the states all dutifully adopt. And so that's how they nail us conservative attorneys. They draft these really vague, broad things that says, you cannot engage in acts of moral turpitude. Well, you could say anything is moral turpitude. You cannot obstruct justice. You could say anything obstructs justice. Right. So that's how this ABA is so powerful, because it basically tells the state bars what to do, and they all do it.
We're going to talk a little bit more about, you know, just how powerful they are these days, because you're aware, right, that the new with the DOJ, who's in charge of the DOJ, Pam Bondi?
Yes.
Yeah, Pam Bondi.
They have removed the ABA from selection of federal judges, right? And so the ABA is taking it on the chin, and I would guarantee you a lot of it has to do with what was coming out of the ABA's Standing Committee on Law and Foreign Policy. Susan Spalding and Elizabeth Roscoff Parker, right?
Well, there's something interesting about that opinion when she issued that letter. Prior to Pam Bondi's intervention,
right,
the American Bar Association was actually entitled to doing special investigations into attorneys that were up for appointment.
Right.
So they got special access to files and background checks and information. They were working in coordination with the appointment committees,
right,
and given special access to interview, and their opinions were weighed very heavily.
Right.
So not only did she say, we're reducing you to the same level as any other lobbyist, you can give us your opinion,
right,
but we're going to cut off all of your clearances to have this special access, and we're no longer going to mandate interviews.
Right.
To me, the most profound thing that came out of that is the fact that this was going on prior to the intervention.
Right.
I don't know that anybody else in the general public knew that these attorneys that were going through this vetting process were being pretty much nominated and approved by the American Bar Association. They
100%.
had that kind of bureaucratic power.
And I didn't even know that. I'm a political, attorney type, and I didn't even realize the ABA had all that power and influence.
Well, we're expecting an article.
Oh, I just wrote one about the ABA a couple weeks ago. I'm all over them.
Well, that's good. I bought one of their books, only one of their books, and it deals with RICO and other corrupt acts in all 50 states, right? And so I normally have it behind me when I do my episodes of What the Fuck's Up. but only when I'm in the office, typically. Yeah, it's another episode coming tomorrow. But anyway, how is this all relevant to the state of Arizona? Well, let's well, first of all, let's talk about number 3. Pull up number 3.
Yeah, so what's interesting about what Steve's pulling up here is this is off of the American Bar Association website.
Right.
And in 2020, they issued an article, it was February of 2020, talking about Russian disinformation and how it's impacting our elections and our judiciary. They talk about how China, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they all somehow muck in our U.S. democracy, but nowhere near to the levels of Russia.
Right.
And then they disclose at the bottom of this document that all the research in the report that Suzanne Spalding and company put out on the Russian disinformation, the Beyond the Kremlin document that created the disinformation task forces, it was funded by the National Association of Bar Executives.
Right.
So what's interesting about that is the mission of the National Association of Bar Executives is supposed to provide information and resources to assist those executives that are sitting on the bars in the various states and the American Bar Association. So they are funding this research to set the very narrative that's being fed to them. So I found that absolutely fascinating. Steve, scroll down to the bottom of that just so people can see that. So it says, Beyond the Ballot, How the Kremlin Works to Undermine the U.S. Justice System was sponsored by the National Association of Bar Executives.
There you go.
You can go ahead and do that now, Steve.
I want to point out to people, too, that a lot of good information has been coming out from Ratcliffe, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, right? He just released a document that shows that Brennan, he was the director of CIA at the time, I believe, that Comey, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and that, who's the third guy? Third guy. You may know the third guy, Brennan, Comey.
We were talking about James Clapper.
James
Clapper.
Clapper.
In 2017, Clapper left DIA and went to work for no other than CNN.
Oh, no,
But
Clapper.
he was with the DIA at the time.
Clapper was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at the time, right?
Until 2017, yes.
Right. And so these 3 individuals, right, this CIA document shows that they knew that the Russia-Trump dossier was fraudulent, but they used it as a basis for their report and pushing all of this Hillary Clinton, Russia interference in our elections narrative that then Susan Spalding and Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker began to push nationally, right, when they leave the NSA and they go to CSIS. Important that people remember, right, that they went to CSIS because CSIS is nothing more than a front organization for national security officers to get them off books.
And I learned that from you. Isn't that the NGO?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
CSIS is the NGO that partners with CISA, which is the federally funded organization.
Right.
Here's the other thing I want to point out is Suzanne Spalding and her partner that we heard speaking in these videos, not only did they visit the state bars in all 50 states, the Arizona State Bar Association paid a stipend to have them come out and speak to attorneys in Flagstaff at the legal conference.
It was a judicial conference.
Yeah, it was a judicial conference. So it was judges, attorneys, bar executives, and they funded that.
Right. And so before we listen to video or to exhibit, I will call them exhibits, exhibit number 4, it's important to remember that in the first video, right, Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker, the question she was asked related directly to Russian disinformation and interference in our elections, correct?
Absolutely.
So let's watch video number 4.
Chief Justice, you set up a task force in Arizona, at the Arizona Judiciary, through an administrative order that specifically wanted to address how you could counter disinformation. What were the particular events that triggered that Arizona courts were the targets of disinformation intended to undermine public trust and confidence?
Well, it was really Ms. Spaulding and Dean Parker. The executive director of the Arizona courts attended a presentation put on in Washington to discuss this specific issue. And he heard Ms. Spaulding's presentation and came back and said, this is really serious. And Dean Parker was kind enough to come out to our leadership conference and present to us and show us the slides. And initially, it's kind of a hard sell. I mean, the Russians are interested in the Arizona courts, seriously. I mean, but you start looking at it, and then I went home and turned on my TV and found Russia Today and found the Chinese version of Russia Today, and there's it became quite credible. And so we put together a task force to try and address those issues, and we really charged them with the idea that let's see if we're seeing disinformation campaigns in the state of Arizona.
All right. That was a former Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, right? And he was talking about Russian disinformation attacks on the Arizona judiciary. And he thanks Susan Spaulding and Elizabeth Rifskoff Parker, the two people who picked up that football from these heads of the national security agencies as they were leaving and a new Trump administration came in. And they ran with that football, right? They went all through, they went up to Chief Justice John Roberts at the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said, hey, we need to talk to judges, Russian disinformation, attacks on our courts, right? And they came to states like Arizona. They tried to get all 50 states to engage in this kind of conduct where they created disinformation task force. Now, I want to ask you, Rachel, and so this is an attack on our court. This is an attack on the very people that are attacking Lady Justice and attempting to destroy justice in America, right? Because we can't have justice if we don't have a but and however. Now, let me ask you, Rachel. If the state bar is an active participant of a disinformation task force targeted at Russian disinformation, and the issue of mail-in ballots is being pushed by the national security agencies as Russian disinformation, do you bring a case?
I mean, you're up against a really uphill battle. I mean, the judges are going to do what they want, and if they want to sanction you as an attorney for bringing a case, they will do it. So,
Right.
If I were still a licensed attorney, I'd be terrified to get involved with anything regarding mail-in ballots because we already know what's going to happen. And they're going to start making rumors about you that you're connected to Russian disinformation yourself.
Yeah.
I just find it really ironic that you've got the bad guys going after the bad guys. You've got these Russians going after the judiciary here. I mean, it's a very strange situation, and it's how do you get into how do you place yourself?
Right. But not only that. I mean, who's the arbiter of truth?
Right. Well, and that's the issue
Right.
I see in all of this is if I'm a judge or an attorney and I've been provided a list, say in 2017, 2018, saying the Russians are building this disinformation campaign, and in 2020, people are going to start saying bad things about the elections. People are going to claim mail-in ballots as a fraud. They're
Right.
going to do all of these things. Then 2020 rolls around. All these things start happening, and people are going to be like, oh,
Well,
this
let's-
must be the Russians.
Yeah.
And then you have attorneys and clients losing credibility with the courts before they even step foot in the doors.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what they were saying was disinformation. Steve, can you pull up website number 17, Exhibit 17? All right.
So this is where they talk about some of the
Right.
things. And this is what's interesting that I've always found interesting is they knew in advance what the complaints were going to be. And they set a stage and they set a narrative so that people like us sitting here today are automatically pegged
number
as
17.
Russian assets. We're working. Yeah, they are.
They're numbered. Well, just cut and paste.
Okay, he's finding the website.
All right. Would you like a coffee? It was rude of us not to
No,
ask. It's
somebody
very
asked me.
rude
I'm
of
good.
Shelby not to
No,
ask.
somebody did. I'm good. Thank you.
I believe that's it. Yeah,
Yes,
scroll down a
that's
little bit. All right. Keep scrolling. And so this is a story put out post 2020 election, right? This is in April of 2021. But scroll down a little bit more. Stop right there. Right. And so there it says Russia's disinformation campaign and its goal. Right. And here they talking about CISA, right? And we all know CISA and Susan Spalding, right? Two spawns of the devil. I'm sorry. Yeah. Can't believe I said that, but what's right here, they list three things, right, in the second paragraph of that section. And so, including according to the report, the main goals of the Russian disinformation campaigns were, number one, to undermine public confidence in election processes and results, right? So they're talking about people like, Alexander Culloden bringing complaints on behalf of Donald Trump in the state of Arizona.
Oh, wait,
saying,
doesn't he have Culloden,
the
a Russian last name?
Right,
Culloden?
Culloden, yeah, maybe
Oh,
he's a
man, he must be
spy,
Russian.
right? And so if you've got a disinformation task force and they're pushing these election claims as being Russian disinformation, do you as an attorney run a risk of having future issues if you bring cases?
You're going to get stereotyped.
Right.
And if you think about it, it's almost like defamation or something. If they're
Right.
trying to claim that you are connected to the Russians and you're not, I don't have a single connection to the Russians.
Right.
So
And number two, to denigrate President Biden's candidacy and the Democratic Party, right? Anything bad, if you go back to the 2020 election, right? Anything bad about Joe Biden or the Democratic Party was Russia propaganda, wasn't it? Do you remember?
oh yeah.
The Hunter Biden
you're old enough
laptops.
to remember, right? The Hunter
Yeah.
Biden laptop.
Yep.
And you
Yeah.
guys, it's still going right now. I've read recently that if you see all those MAGA-looking generic accounts that are constantly going off on the evil Jews,
Right.
I've heard that's Russians too behind those accounts, pretending to be MAGA and acting super anti-Semitic.
And it's interesting that we had a video we played once where Susan Spalding is talking to judges in Maricopa County, right, on this Zoom chat. And this city of Mesa judge, he sort of asks her incredulously, so what are the Russians doing? Like sitting around in these large apartment buildings, just, following
In a
Twitter?
basement.
Right. And it's like they've got these hordes. And Susan Spalding admitted what? Do we have that video?
We can definitely find it. I didn't
Yeah.
put it up, but we've played it in our previous episode
Right.
where Suzanne Spalding says, well, we've come to realize that
Right.
it's not so much the Russians are making up information.
It's those fucking MAGA people.
They're taking information by the Americans
Right.
and propagating it.
Right. Yeah, it's we white collar hillbillies.
We,
Right.
the people, are the
such a
disinformation,
thing?
and Russia's just helping
Right.
us.
Right. Okay, so no, let's pull up another one. Let's do number 18. This is www.americanbar.org. Fact sheet. What we know about Russia's interference operations. Damn Ruskies, man. Okay, scroll down. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, slow down. I'm sorry. I'm meditating, trying to find what I'm looking for. Okay, scroll down a little bit.
Is
more.
that your Russian meditation,
By
Brian?
Russian meditation.
Because you're just an operative. We're figuring this out about you finally.
There we go. It's right here. The U.S. intelligence community published a declassified joint report assessing that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign aimed at the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
Right, and this is all Susan Spalding stuff, right? And so you know the Russians are all over influencing our elections, right? And that's what Susan Spalding said when she said, I was sitting at home, watching this, the inauguration, and I was dismayed. And, well, then they took action, and they overthrew the government of the United States of America, right? And I will say that until, I've been in my grave for a very long time. You can pull that.
Why not put the burden on them to prove that we're not, living under fascist, running the government right now?
Right. Yeah, you can pull it down. All right, and so, this disinformation task force, we can see, was clearly focused on Russian disinformation, right, targeting the Arizona judiciary. We can see clearly that our elections are a significant component of this disinformation task force, right? And so, we have, I talked earlier about Adrian Fontes, right, calling you fascists if you challenge elections, right?
Right. With the seal of the American Bar Association in front of him and behind him.
The Arizona Bar Association.
Right.
Yeah. Do we have that chain of custody document?
We do. Steve, can you put up number 16, please?
And now Adrian Fontes ran the 2020 elections in Maricopa County, right? You ever seen this document we're going to bring up? This is the day after the election in 2020, right? Somebody delivers 18,000 ballots to Runbeck the day after the election, right? And this is Adrian Fontes does not want people to challenge his elections, yet in 2020, this document shows they received and counted 18,000 ballots they accepted on the day after the election, right?
And not a judge will do a thing about it.
And so, do you remember when we first broke this document, what the county came out and said?
I don't. I know they said, obviously, that it was false information, but I don't remember what the counter narrative was.
They didn't.
Oh, that's right.
Their
They
first
didn't
statement,
counter it.
Their first statement, I jumped on it because it was an admission that they had violated Arizona law, right? And then they very quickly retracted it and said, oh yeah, these were just like sitting in a truck at MC Tech or something. They just leave 18,000 ballots sitting around in a truck and drive.
Right.
Down
Nobody believes
right.
that. They're not going to make a mistake that big
Right.
accidentally.
Right.
I mean, that's
Right.
like probably a felony.
But in the context, right, of Russia attacking our democracy, Russia attacking American elections, Russia attacking our courts. In that context, they do this.
Right.
And then who's there to challenge it?
Well, here's something interesting that just dawned on me, and I don't know why I didn't catch this when we were prepping for the show, but in this last 2024 election, Runbeck had shut down operations. It was the day after, and they were getting ready to send their observers home. And they get a call from Maricopa County Elections Department.
Well, we found some ballots, man.
We found a rack of ballots in a room they weren't supposed to be in that we forgot to send you, and we're going to be sending these over to you now. That was the day after elections.
Right.
And ironically, if I remember correctly, it was around 18,000 ballots.
Yeah.
And this is 4 years later.
Right.
So maybe we'll have to do some more homework on that and pull out that video footage and talk about that in a future episode. But it just crossed my mind that we're kind of
Well-
repeating history here.
Yeah, and that's like 2022, the election I was sanctioned for, right? Perkins Coie's attorneys come out and say, "Oh yeah, based on these chain of custody documents, Maricopa County would know, if ballots were ejected or removed to or from the system, right?" And so we said, "Oh yeah, well then we all agree that whatever number was added to the system, because that was the difference when you added up all the chain of custody documents, right? That's how much their chain of custody documents were actually short." And so, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office says, "Sanctions, foul, cry foul." Adrian Fontes then substitutes in as counsel, right, for the Secretary, as the actual Secretary of State, right, because he had won the election, was sworn in. So then he substitutes in place of Katie Hobbs, who was formerly the Secretary of State, but then became the governor, right? And so he says, "Oh, no, they would never know that because these are simple estimates," right? First of all, that's an admission that Maricopa County violated the law when they did not count the number of ballots they received. Right. The law says count, right? It doesn't say estimate. And those are two functionally different words, folks, right? And that's why I talk a lot on What the Fuck's Up about how they use language to sort of flip the script.
Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about there is no black and white. Everything's just sort of gray.
Right.
Just like when Ray Valenzuela, I think it was Ray Valenzuela, testified and said, well, we use a different process on election day. Right. And everybody's like, oh, well, that explains it. They just use a different process. But where in the law does it distinguish how they need to operate between the day before election and election day?
Right.
And I want to point out to you guys, so when you're talking about them not counting the ballots, that is a violation of the chain of custody, which is a class 2 misdemeanor. And so every single ballot that's lacking a chain of custody is a class 2 misdemeanor. And I've written tons of articles about how there have been literally hundreds of thousands of class 2 misdemeanors in our recent elections because of no chain of custody. And let's not forget the post office. They don't count the ballots when they send them over to run back. Every single one of those ballots is violating a class 2 misdemeanor. And I can say this, I'm the former Maricopa County elections attorney and a prosecutor.
Well, now, one thing, and this was what was interesting about the last election, right? And I think it became a 2-page ballot for a reason, and maybe it was for this reason. We started demanding, right? And I believe Representative Collidan sent the Maricopa County Attorney or Maricopa County Elections Department correspondence saying, "We want you to give us all of your weight receipts that you receive with every delivery of ballots from the U.S. Postal Service." Guess what Maricopa County throws away? The weight receipts.
The weight receipts. They don't
Now,
exist.
when we did the audit for the Arizona Senate in 2021, we weighed all the ballots.
Well, of course.
And we were, and the ballot weight, we could calculate the total number of ballots. And it was exceptionally close to the total number of ballots that we got by hand count, to the total number of ballots we got using those stupid little counter machines, right? They're like money counter thingies. But
You mean it wasn't off by like
No.
24,000 ballots, Brian?
No, it wasn't off as much as Stephen Richards' estimates, right? And so these are all things that I would encourage attorneys to think about, that I would encourage, anybody in our society to think about how these sort of attacks, blaming Russian interference in our system and getting our courts to create these disinformation task force, what the ramifications of that type of behavior are, and how that impacts systemically our constitutional system of government, right? Because when I asked the question earlier, who is the arbiter of truth?
Right.
Right? Who's the arbiter of fact?
who's the arbiter of disinformation? All these disinformation task
Right.
force they're creating, they're all full of Democrats. There's no MAGA people on there. They get to define what disinformation is, and then as you guys and me have covered previously, they go and they complain to Twitter, Facebook, and they say this is disinformation. You need to take this down, and so they have taken it down previously, and so they're basically what they're doing is just censoring the rest of us conservatives. That's what they're
And
doing.
even the things that aren't being censored, they come with disclaimers. Have you seen that? Where some of the YouTube videos, some of the posts that are put out on social media, they literally have disclaimers saying this has been debunked as potentially untruthful. They put these disclaimers out there. They are literally acting as the ministry of truth.
I stopped posting my videos on YouTube because I had so many strikes. If I get one more, I'm banned.
Huh. Well, when I asked that question, who's the arbiter of truth, right? Who's the finder of fact? The court. And how do our courts work, right? There's always a but. There's always a however. There's never just the national security state says.
There's two parties that are supposed to be able to present the evidence, put
and
the facts down, and have full legal counsel representing them.
And that's why Lady Justice has how many scales?
Only two.
She's got two. One for each side, right? What's the truth? So what is disinformation, right? Instead of allowing the national security state to come here dressed up as some third-party non-governmental organization, right, to create what I would label a judicial censorship board, right, because the state bar is a functional element, and most attorneys are scared to death of the state bar, right? And let's talk, we're going to go to that section right now. We're going to talk about why they're afraid of the
Before
state
we
bar.
go into who's behind this and why this is happening, should we go ahead and point out that this Russia disinformation not only impacted the courts and our elections, but they targeted other individuals that had made some movements towards liberty, particularly one individual who started the walkaway movement.
Brandon Straka, right?
So,
no doubt about it.
It's interesting what Brandon had, the conclusions he came to, right?
In fact, Susan Spalding, right? She's going at the federal level. She's going to the state level. She's at the ABA. She's using Brandon Straka and the walkaway movement, right, as an example of Russian disinformation when she's teaching judges, right?
And I just want to point out, you guys keep bringing up
Oh, Mike, cut out. Go ahead.
Okay, talking to you. Well, I just wanted to point out. A good example of how they're going after others is the prosecution of the alternate electors in Arizona, because that has both attorneys and regular people. All those electors they're going after were just regular patriots. And then there's also some Trump associates who are being prosecuted by Chris Mays. So exactly, this isn't just the conservative attorneys. This is also any conservative activist concerned about voter fraud.
Well, and you said that talk about Chris Mays. She
The alleged AG.
the alleged AG. She's not the AG. I mean, the AG is actually Norm Eisen, right?
Actually, the
States
AG,
United.
Warren Peterson calls himself the AG here because he's
Right.
representing the state in all the cases she won't.
Yeah. Well, Norm Eisen's her boss, right? Stephen Richard, Norm Eisen, all these folks.
Isn't he the one drafting all the pleadings for going after the alternate electors? And yeah.
Well, that's because she never drafted a pleading before. I don't know.
Well, she was never an attorney before she became the alleged AZAG.
Yeah, that's funny. So anyway, what is disinformation? Steve, can you pull up Exhibit 6?
We're not going to play the Brandon Straka video?
Oh, yeah, let's play the Brandon Straka video.
Let's play number 19, Steve.
I think
if you
I've
could put up
tweeted
Brandon
about this
Straka.
before quite a bit because, this was real quick just to couch it and give some context, right? Brandon Straka was sick of what the left was doing, the political left was doing. And so he created a walkaway movement, right? Which, he gave this, he put this video on the internet and said, "This is why I'm walking away from the Democratic Party," right? Became a huge phenomenon, a huge, deal where people started putting their videos on this website online explaining why they individually were walking away from the Democratic Party. Now, so this is a run up to an election, and this organization, this movement created by Brenda Straka is talking about exactly what the Susan Spalding wants people to stop talking about, right? The Democratic Party.
Well, and that's their objective number 2, to stop disinformation that undermines the Democratic Party. Right? So Brandon Straka undermined the movements of the Democrat Party. Therefore, it must be who?
Russia.
Must be Russia.
He does look kind of Russian, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That last name? Come on, man. Might be Russian.
Hey, if you're watching, Mr. Straka, can you put one of those Russian hats on so that we can verify whether or not you're Russian or not?
Right.
Right? Because if they fit, that means you're Russian.
Oh, is that how that works?
I
It's
think
like,
so.
like the OJ trial. If it doesn't fit,
No,
you
the
must
glove
acquit.
does not fit. It won't go into my hand. Right? Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Okay, Steve, can you go ahead and play 19 for us, please?
Further away from something called reality.
Right? Almost immediately, an attack was initiated against us. In early July, the left-wing media began churning out a blitzkrieg of articles stating that Walkaway was a Russian disinformation campaign. Remember that? And that the hashtag was not being used by real people, but by Russian bots at Vladimir Putin's direction. But it quickly became much more unhinged. Within weeks, the left-wing media began reporting that the people in Walkaway testimonials were paid actors and Shutterstock models. Some articles even suggested that I was being paid by Russia to act as a spokesman for the movement. It was shocking, but back then my team and I thought it was somewhat funny. I felt a sense of pride to be so threatening to the left that they would engage in this type of outlandish attempt to discredit me and Walkaway. What we didn't know then, and didn't find out until many years later, was that this narrative didn't originate from a bunch of leftist hacks in the mainstream media. In 2018, former heads of the CIA, NSA, DHS, along with Hillary Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta, created a digital dashboard called Hamilton 68, which claimed to track Russian influence and disinformation. Hamilton 68 was the source that created the lie that Walkaway was a Russian propaganda campaign supported by Russian bot accounts. And meet Suzanne Spalding, senior advisor for the Department of Homeland Security. Spalding's job was to conduct cybersecurity trainings for our government intelligence agencies to track Russian disinformation. Hashtag Walkaway was one of Spalding's commonly used examples in her trainings. In one such government cybersecurity training session titled "Why Putin Targets Minorities," Spalding stated, "We believe that Russia targets, fosters, and weaponizes specific groups to serve the larger purpose of undermining the appeal of liberal democracies. As individuals begin to identify with these online groups more strongly, Russian disinformation then encourages them to disengage or hashtag walk away."
Wow.
Further
So
away from
Right?
heaven forbid people just choose to walk away based on their own knowledge and accord.
Right.
It must be the Russians. You know, Rachel, for me, the scariest part of all of this is the average American. We look at the intelligence agency and people think these are the smartest of the smart. These are the people that are on the ground. They know what's happening globally and they're here to protect us. Certainly, these people have been in place to establish truth and justice and protection for the American people. And then we see this. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
You know, I think it's finally coming out how a lot of these bureaucrats in these federal agencies are just partisan hacks. I mean, we've seen that, they're from their lofty ivory towers. They come in, a bunch of do-gooders with their progressive agendas, and they're not any smarter than the rest of us. I mean, I've worked for county government. I've worked for state government. I know what federal government is like. They've got a lot of lazy government employees there. They're not necessarily the best and the brightest. A lot of people go to government if you want a lazy job. So I don't see them as being any more wise or, any better than the rest of us. And as for this Russian, being behind people and things like that, I mean, why can't I get in on that? If my objections to election fraud are because the Russians are paying me, then come on, give me some money, man. I mean, don't I deserve
Get your
it?
law license back.
I can get my law license back. And heck, my last name is Alexander. I mean, that could be a Russian last name, right?
Right. Well,
if they pay enough for it,
I'm going
right?
to do this.
Where's the money, man? I mean, if I'm going to be accused of it, I want the money.
Wasn't it last week we played a video of Hillary Clinton and that one hack on MSNBC or something like that, inviting China to interfere in American elections?
Not only interfere in the elections, she literally asked them to hack President Trump's tax returns.
Right. Well, I'm gonna do something similar. I'm gonna say, hey, Mr. Putin, Vladimir Putin, why don't you send this young lady a check so she can pay her bar dues?
He won't do it, though, because I have bashed Putin too many times on social media.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
It's just not going to work. Not a Putin fan here, sorry.
Right, but you know what really scared me about what Brandon Straka said? He said that that Susan Spalding was tasked with educating members of government. Right. He wasn't specific.
Right.
She was tasked with educating our judges about Russian disinformation. And she was using the walkaway movement as one of her chief examples of how the Russians are trying to influence our elections. And the walkaway movement was very anti-Democratic Party. They were people fed up with the Democratic Party. She's teaching people that challenging the Democratic Party or saying bad things about Joe Biden is Russian disinformation.
I hope to God Brandon Straka sues her for defamation and libel. To me, that is black and white. That saying walkaway is Russian disinformation. That is flat out lie right there. Yep. I would sue if I was him.
I agree 100%. Hey, let's bring up the number 8. The CISA info webpage, universalrights.org.
Yeah, it was the same one you brought up first. Go ahead and bring it up.
Did you already bring it up?
Yeah, we brought that one up.
Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then never mind.
No, just bring up element 9. DHS withheld July and
yes, that's the one I'm thinking about.
Let's bring up element 9.
Number 9. Exhibit 9, I should say. Oh, my God. Jesus. Is that a frickin' Russian marching?
It's Brian.
Wow.
And that's Brandon Straka standing behind him right there.
Right. And then I'm in the very back of the line.
Oh, wow.
So in early July, the Department of Homeland Security withheld publication of an intelligence bulletin warning law enforcement agencies of a Russian scheme to promote allegations about the poor mental health of Joe Biden.
Oh, my God. Now we finally learn it's the Russians that gave Joe Biden dementia.
Right? It says the Russians are likely to have denigrated the health of U.S. candidates to influence the 2020 election.
Right.
How could they do something so horrible like that?
Sinister, absolutely sinister. Right? But this is what, right? This is Susan Spalding. This is the smut that she's peddling on our judiciary in an effort to control the narrative. And so as a public policy issue, when our courts create a disinformation task force, and Susan Spalding, the corrupt person she is peddling this smut on our judges and through our bar association, using both the ABA and our court system and disinformation task forces, this denies people the right to challenge their elections because their attorneys are afraid to do so.
Well, and remember, they're doing this education. They're going in and they're speaking to these judges and these attorneys under the arm of the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, and the DIA. So they are literally using the arm of the intelligence agencies in the government and coming in and saying, we've got special intel for you.
Right.
And this is super important. This is not just a group of people going around making claims. Right. This is our government.
These are people, right, Rachel, who could literally say, when you ask them, how do you know? They can say, I know. Trust me.
I was briefed by high intelligence. That's what they're going to say.
Or I'd have to kill you.
When it's some progressive activist working at the CIA or whatever your state, federal agency is.
Right. That's exactly what it is. And so, this what our judicial system has experienced has been a complete and utter scam. Much of it was led by who? Can either of you take a guess? Famous. I'll give you a clue. Rachel, let's let her guess first.
Okay.
She's a female.
You get to guess first.
Wait. She led the what? What are you saying she led? I missed that part.
That led the coup against the United States government in 2020. No.
I mean, it's not like.
She wanted to be president.
So it's Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton. Right. Hillary Clinton. When she lost, she was deeply buried in the Department of State. Right. She was deeply buried in what's that scummy organization they just defunded?
Which one? There's a lot of them.
Huh?
USAID.
USAID became the tool after the CIA assassinated John F. Kennedy, became the tool of the CIA to overthrow governments around the world. Right? That's what they used for their color revolutions. That's what they used to overthrow the government in the Ukraine in 2014. Right, and they brought it home. A lot of these organizations like CSIS and other organizations, these non-governmental organizations that are national security spooks, change their clothes and they go from public sector to private.
Right.
They're funded in part by USAID.
Well, and I want to reiterate, because I think this is super important. Mm-hmm. They change their clothes. They leave the government agencies and they go to these NGOs, but they use those titles, those government titles, to gain credibility and to get their agenda pushed through. So it'll be former head of CIA is now director of nonprofit X. Right.
Producer Steve
Let's not
to
forget, they keep their security clearances too. They get these high-paying jobs after they move out of the public service.
Right.
And they keep their security clearances.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them worth so much money. That's why they all become millionaires, multi-millionaires.
We need to find that clip. So we have a Zoom video called Feds for Democracy, and we've played some clips from that for you before. But there is one particular moment where a woman who works for CISA talks about the fact that she helped develop CISA and that she no longer works for CISA. She's with a nonprofit now, but she still has close ties in the agency and has maintained her security clearance.
Right.
So that's exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right.
So we mentioned Hillary Clinton. So let's talk. You know what the 65 Project is, Rachel?
I've probably written more articles about it than almost any journalist in the country.
Yeah. Well, let's bring up Exhibit 10. Right. What's their goal? The goal of the 65 Project.
I can answer that.
It's to save democracy from bad attorneys, right, Rachel?
Right. All right. They aired ads in battleground states, including Arizona, right? They will push the ABA and every state bar association to codify rules barring certain election challenges, right? So they're very concerned about elections and challenging these fraudulent elections.
Only
that,
when,
that
you know,
we have.
Republicans are
Right.
challenging the
Only
elections.
when Republicans are challenging. And so this Brock guy whom they're interviewing, right? He said that the idea is to not only bring the grievances in the bar complaints, but shame them and make them toxic in their communities and in their firm.
John Eastman always repeats that line.
Right?
Oh, yeah, because that's what they tried to do to him, you know,
Yeah.
when they...
Well, it's exactly what they tried to do to me, right? Once I was suspended, all their friends of the news media come out, no, you know, he's a liar.
Well, they write all these horrible articles about
Right.
you whenever anything negative happens, but whenever you get a victory or you turn around some discipline or something, you notice there's not a peep. They don't ever write anything good about you. They only write bad things about you. So people in the community will have this horrible impression of you.
Right. That's what they want. Little Bo Peep. Right? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and put
11.
up number 11.
Right. So who started the 65 Project? It was devised by Democratic consultant and former Clinton administration official Melissa Moss. Right? Everybody likes to say Barack Obama was behind the theft of the 2020 election. We talk far more on this show about the role of Hillary Clinton in the fraud of 2020 than anybody else, other than maybe Susan Spalding. Right? Now, who is Clinton tied to? Clinton is tied to, who's that schmuck? The Arizona Attorney General? Norm Eisen.
Yeah.
Right?
Norm
Tied to
Eisen.
Norm Eisen. Right? Who else is she tied to? Who's that other attorney?
Mark Elias.
Mark Elias. She's tied to Mark Elias and Perkins Coie, right? Perkins Coie is the law firm, if you all remember, that allowed the Federal Bureau of Investigation to office in their office space, right?
How generous.
How generous, right? Aren't there ethical issues with that?
Well, because they're on the left, they all get swept under the rug. It doesn't matter. No conflict here. Move along.
Right,
Nothing to see.
right. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Right, but that's the very same law firm that said, oh, Maricopa County would have known if ballots were injected into the system based on these chain of custody documents, right? That was a lie, straight up, explicit lie, effort to mislead the court, right? But hey, it's Perkins Coie, and they're a big time law firm. And Brian's, didn't they talk about 65 Project? Talk about targeting little fish?
Oh, yeah.
Or have we gotten to that slide?
We haven't
yet?
gotten there yet, but we certainly can
Right.
skip to there and move back if you like.
And so Hillary Clinton's tied to all these people, folks. She's tied through her ties at the State Department to USAID and, the CIA. I always like to say the State Department is nothing but the front man for the CIA. Right?
Well, and I think we have something here where they admit that they share staff.
well,
right?
well
Should we
let's
talk
hold on.
about that, or do you
Where's
want to
the
go
other-
to Little Fish?
What are we using? No, I want to put. Yeah, go ahead. 12.
Yeah, let's do 12, Steve, because I think this is important. We talk about how
Uh-huh.
these national intelligence officers move from the agency into
Right.
these NGOs, and they
Now-
maintain their security clearance.
Right. I want you to all to hearken back to the first video we played, right, where Susan or Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker, the former spook attorney, and the woman working with Susan Spalding on corrupting our judicial processes, says, right, oh yeah, we left, and I work with her at CSIS, and that's just what we do. Well, right here. This is an interview, and let's see here. I'm gonna put them in the. I think you got to scroll down. Keep
Yep, keep
scrolling.
going.
Yeah, keep scrolling.
It's down in that second red box. There
Right.
we go.
All right. And so it says, And it is really a great service to the government and the United States, and we much appreciate it. CSIS and we at the National Security Council have shared ideas, as I just said, and we've shared staff. Right? They share staff. So this is government can't do a lot of things. Right? Can the government censor our speech?
It does.
It does. Is it supposed to?
Only if it's obscene and
Right.
what the Supreme Court has said
Right.
can be censored, which is a very limited amount of speech.
Right. You
So the
can't-
government would never get away with censoring a mass scale movement like the America First movement
or the walkaway movement.
or the Walkaway movement and Brandon
Well,
Straka.
if you read the MSM, that's true. The government never censors conservatives. We're all just Russians, whining about it or something.
But they just change clothes. That's all they're doing. They're changing clothes. They're sitting on the same boards. They're all still on the American Bar Association. They all still hang out together. And they all, actively work to corrupt our judicial process.
And that's how people become rhinos, because you work and get to know the same people for
Right.
years. And so you've got all these loyalties to them. And I don't mean to get into the weeds, you guys, but as somebody in media, I cover this quite a bit. There's also a revolving door with the mainstream media. So you see all these people who worked under, the Clinton administration, the Obama administration. Once they're out of office, these people all go and get choice gigs at CNN, MSNBC. And then when the Democrats come back into power, they go back there. So, they've got the fourth estate as well. You've got these revolving doors in all these powerful parts of government and the fourth estate, and they all know each other. They all talk to each other.
Right.
You get your media spin because you got your people in the media in the off years.
Right.
Well, you've got, what do you got? You got Stephen Richer went to the Arizona Republic, right?
Right.
You've got James Clapper. We know he went to CNN. You've got Data Guru, your favorite guy, right?
Tommy.
Who's went into the reporting realm, but
Right.
still does private contracting work for the government,
Right.
right? So Garrett Archer, he's a reporter now, right? And he's in the media, but he also helped develop the Avid system for our voter rolls as a private government contractor. So you're exactly right. It's just a revolving door. They keep
Right.
their buddies close. They keep their cronies in place and just move them around.
And there are ethics rules, like in government. When I was at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, we had ethics rules that applied to everybody, even if you weren't an attorney. So there are conflicts of interest rules
Right.
that do apply to these rotating, revolving doors, but they're not being enforced.
Right. I believe you were asked that question, weren't you, when you were recently deposed by the Maricopa County in our lawsuit against what was then Stephen Richer, but is now against Justin Heap because of the change in recorders.
Right.
But didn't they ask you if we have a code of ethics that we work by?
Absolutely, they
Yeah,
did.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's interesting they would ask that, but yet our media. But I want to go back a little bit to the 65 Project. Bring up number 13 real quick. Right? All right. They're talking about me. Right? I think the littler fish are probably more vulnerable to what we're doing. You're threatening their livelihood, and they've got reputations in their local communities.
Oh, I want to talk about this too.
The little fish.
Because I was a little fish, and the reason they went after me, I was the low-hanging fruit. I wasn't the politician. I didn't have the powerful
Right.
network. I didn't have a lot of money. So that's
Right.
why they went after me, because
Right.
if they thought they could get me to turn, they wanted me to
Right.
say bad stuff about my boss. And so, yeah, they know exactly what they're doing, because they know you don't have the resources. You're a sole practitioner, right?
Yeah.
They know you're not super wealthy.
Right.
They know you're not super powerful and connected.
I can't afford a $500 an hour lawyer.
Exactly.
Right.
So they use you, they use me
Right.
to just trounce us and destroy
And
us.
then they invite people like Adrian Fontes to give bar speeches to young attorneys. This, folks, This is targeting these young attorneys that have an appetite, that want to make a name for themselves by bringing claims. This is keeping them from doing it. This is about keeping them in check.
They can say things like,
Right.
remember what happened to Rachel?
Right.
Remember what happened to Brian?
Right.
You don't want that to happen to you. Don't you have big student loans to pay
Right.
off?
You don't want to be a fascist because you've got kids to feed, right? You've got school to pay for. You've got all of this stuff, and we will come after you. And that's exactly the goal behind the 65 Project, right? And not only that, but, for example, in the Lake v. Richer case, I was local counsel. Right. We had Kurt Olson. He was national counsel that came in. Kurt Olson could not come and practice in the state of Arizona because he's not licensed here. As a result of that, he needed to associate with local counsel, which, typically in that type of case is going to be a smaller firm such as myself. And this type of thinking is designed exactly to keep people from taking cases with Kurt Olson and saying, yes, let's do this because our elections are fucked, right? We've got to do something about this. And so this is criminal. This is lawfare is an attack on justice. It's an attack on our third branch of government, right? And it needs to end.
Well, remember the old saying, ask them and they'll show you who they are. I mean, they're telling you who they are here.
Right.
That their goal is to shame, demoralize, make them toxic to their community, and go after their livelihood.
Well,
but then they say, we're the good guys.
Yeah.
We're the good guys. We want to damage and destroy.
Us and putting us in prison, and they are the good guys. I mean, I write about all these election attorneys who are being prosecuted, and there's a bunch of them now. It's not even just a handful anymore. How is that good? That's fascism. All you did was, challenge election results using the legal process. Going by the rules of the state bars is how you filed the lawsuits. And there have been so many lawsuits filed prior to 2020 where judges actually did overturn elections. I've written about many of them. It was only after Trump won in 2020 did they start coming after and disciplining and prosecuting attorneys for bringing these cases.
Right. Well, it's interesting that, the Arizona legislature has some work to do. And the reason I say that is our elections are relatively new, right? We've heard them all scream, like Stephen Richer, oh, we're losing all of our experienced election officials, and Adrian Fontes has said the same BS, right? How long have we had this style of election? It hadn't been very long, right?
What do you mean by this style of election?
Well, as of wasn't it 2016 or 2018 that you'd go to your precinct and vote? Right. We don't have this. I mean, mail-in balloting is huge. Elections have changed significantly.
2018, there was major shifts in the election system in the state of Arizona.
Right, and that in large part, Susan Spalding, and I think we played some of that on our show. Susan Spalding talking about how, we went and we looked at every state, at every local jurisdiction, and every election rule, right? They went and looked at how you actually feed a ballot into a machine, into a tabulator, right? They looked at voter registration databases. They looked at everything. They knew every jurisdiction in America, and they knew everything about their election, right? They knew exactly which jurisdictions to target. But our elections have fundamentally changed. They're radically different. The only discovery, do you know what discovery you're allowed in an election case?
Now you're getting out of my knowledge.
To look at the ballots. Right, just like we did in Lake v. Hobbs. We said, we want to look at the ballots. And our guy goes and looks at the ballots, and he finds 19-inch ballots printed on 20-inch ballot paper. Right, you can't tabulate them. Right.
But it's not even all the ballots.
Right.
They don't even let you look at all the ballots.
Right.
So you have no discovery. You're not entitled to any public records.
Right.
And you have limited inspection capabilities. and that's it.
Right.
There's no ability to actually function like a regular lawsuit.
Right. And our elections are so dependent on technology right now that's where the real discovery needs to happen. Right? Because you know what happened during Lake v. Hobbs? We submitted a bunch of public records requests, and then they hem and haw, and then you have to file lawsuits. But the election challenge has to happen quickly. Right? They have to happen. They have to take place very quickly.
But the courts don't. They drag them out for months until everybody's got fatigue, and so nothing ever happens. They get away with it.
Well, no, ours happened fairly quickly.
You mean, but they dismissed it, but then you had to appeal it.
Well, then we appealed, and then we won partially on appeal, and it was kicked back down to, a second trial, right? And so, they happen very quickly. They happen much faster than public records request, right?
2.5 years later.
Right. And so because of the changes, the fundamental changes in our elections, I think the rules for discovery and election challenges need to be somewhat updated. But that's a role for the legislature. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about Susan Spalding and the ABA. Hey, Steve, can you pull up number 17?
That's the
No, wait.
GLS.org website. Is that
No,
what you're
where's
wanting?
the big website? That big website. That would really. I want the one.
Oh, I
Okay,
don't.
no, go 18.
Yeah, go 18.
Go 18, and then we got to get him this website.
The American Bar website.
No, this. But go to 18. Pull up 18 real quick.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Pull
it.
up 18.
Committee members. Okay. And so that link is not broken. I tried it. All right. And so he needs to get that one really bad. And so can you scroll down? These are committee members. We're looking at 2024, 2025 bar year, and this is the Committee on Law and Foreign Policy, I believe it's called. Oh, Law and National Security. Okay, slow down. Go standing committee. Okay, scroll. Keep a scrolling. Okay, hold on. Let's see here. All right, keep scrolling. I might have. What red thing? What the hell was that so fast for? Oh, stop right there. Special advisors to the advisory committee, right? This first guy, his name is Stuart Baker, and he used to work for. Hey, have you ever heard of Steptoe and Johnson?
Oh, just another one of the millions of progressive large law firms.
Right. Well, do you know what Arizona politician, specifically Maricopa County politician, was an attorney for Steptoe and Johnson in Chicago?
I know that. Can I answer?
She knows that.
Stephen Richer.
Stephen Richer.
Oh, just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Right. It's interesting because I've looked up Stephen Richer, and it almost looks like his buddies at the NSA walk behind him with a little pooper scooper, right, on social media, and they pick up all this shit.
Oh,
Because you can't. I'm sorry.
That's falling out of his hair.
Right.
That weird hair.
Right. But, so I wonder if he knows Stuart Baker, because I guarantee you Stuart Baker knows. Who do you think? Who do you think he knows?
Stephen Richer.
Probably, but I'm thinking of a female.
Chris May?
Your
Hillary
girlfriend you keep mentioning.
Susan Spalding. Right, Susan
Sorry,
Spalding.
your wife's
So
gonna kill me.
scroll down. All right, so keep going. Oh, hold on. Oh, Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker is a counselor on this committee.
Didn't Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker work with Suzanne Spalding?
Yeah, in Reiskopf. Sounds German to me.
Maybe it's Russian.
Could be Russian.
Coming back to Russian disinformation.
Right.
Oh, and Harvey Rishikoff, Director of Policy and Cyber
Russian.
Research.
Well, maybe he is. He sounds Russian, yeah. Yeah, we'll scroll past him because he sounds Russian. Chairs of the Standing Committee. Keep going. I know Susan Spalding. She used to be the chair of this committee 2001 to 2004.
Now, this committee couldn't possibly be a subcommittee of the American Bar Association?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Just a coincidence. Nothing
Just a
to see here,
coincidence.
folks. Move on. Next
But
topic.
did you send him the next link?
I did. So when we get done here, he'll get that prepped for you.
All right. Pull up the next link she just sent you, Steve, because I think this is because this is very interesting, because I've been talking about Susan Spalding for a very long time, right? And you know, in fact, I think one of the first tweets I did on this subject with the national security agencies attacking our courts, I got a lot of conservative attorney flack for it. Don't include me on those tweets because, you know, you're going to get yourself in trouble with a bar. And I actually had a bar, you know.
I actually remember getting one of those late night calls from an attorney friend of ours.
Tell
Brian, take that down and never tag me in that garbage again.
Right, yeah.
Like, all you're doing is mentioning them, and they're terrified.
I know, right? And so anyway, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, bring it up. All right. And so these are, you know, this committee that we were just talking about, law and national security, right? They do a lot of like videos and they record these people speaking and stuff like that, right? You ever been a member of the ABA?
Heck no.
Hell no. Oh, let's see here. Let's see. Spalding. Foreign threats to democracy. Go to foreign threats to democracy and click on it. Now scroll down and let's listen to the video or the audio or whatever it is. Okay, stop. Oh, Jesus, gosh. It says, oops, we could not find that track.
Well, they're not going to let you see what they're doing, Brian.
Okay, go back. Hit the back. Okay, now let's try another one. Scroll down. Oh, Protecting Democratic Institutions, Part 1 with Susan Spalding and Elizabeth Reiskopf Parker. Okay, let's watch this video.
Ooh, episode 39. Oh, where'd it go?
We can't find that track. What has happened to Susan Spalding? You know what I think's happened to Susan Spalding? I think they're mad that we have been using her against herself by showing her in her own words, right? That she is corrupting our system, that she has attacked the judicial branch of government at the federal level in the state of Arizona with her bullshit Russia crap, and that she's admitted on a Zoom call with a local Mesa judge that it's not really the Russians. It's people like you
and you,
Rachel.
This is amazing that you've exposed her enough that they are actually taking her off of websites and trying to reduce the information about her. I know, just little old you.
They got the Stephen Richard Pooper Scooper.
You know, and now you've got Brandon Straka talking about her.
Right.
So I feel like you're finally getting somewhere from just, you know, little old you where the bar's trying to discipline you for talking about it.
Well, what do they always say? The truth shall set you free.
My mom always said the Bible verse, your sins will find you out.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is interesting. So I had Steve go to another link, Saving Our Democracy for America and the World. Certainly, they would want that to be a high priority.
Video.
Why would they take it down?
Unavailable. Is that a Susan Spalding video?
That is a Suzanne Spalding video. It's
hey,
now removed.
Suzanne, you know, repost your stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, what do we say? I mean, I think we're getting ready to wrap up, but this is a public policy debate the United States needs to have, because America's supposed to have an independent judiciary. And I don't care if it's Trump attacking the judiciary, or I don't care if it's Clinton attacking the judiciary through her spook hacks in the CIA and the NSA and CISA and these other federal government organizations where they get to go change their clothes and be a private player actor in a non-governmental organization using the exact same resources, right? An attack on the judicial system of the United States of America is an attempt to make the United States a one-party political system by eliminating the but and however from law. And that should be a crime.
And they're also really trying to eliminate the other branches of government when they're not in charge of them. So because the Democrats dominate the legal system, okay, that's one that they can use. But when the Republicans are in charge of Congress and Republicans are in charge of the presidency, we just are just going to have the legal system completely shut down anything those two other branches of government do.
Right.
Well, and we also have to think about the amount of funding and lobbying that goes into this system that they've built. I know we've had some great legislators over the course of probably at least 10 years, and every session, somebody sponsors a bill to make membership to the Arizona bar non-compulsory, right? We need to keep pushing that. We need to fight for that. The American people need to show up in mass forces to these committees, because we have to outnumber the lobbyists who are keeping this system intact. Because I know the legislature, they know what's happening now. They know what's happening now, and now is as good a time of any, especially now that President Trump and Pam Bondi and others are bringing attention to what's happening.
Right.
We have to take up this banner, and we have to fight for it, because this is a clear step towards election integrity. So for those of you out there saying, I'm all about election integrity, I don't care about the bar, I don't care about anything else, this is a step towards that. Just like election integrity is a step towards securing our border, we must get our judiciary back. We must be able to have attorneys that will defend our rights. And the best way to do that is to stop eliminating the power and control of the American Bar Association and the state bars.
And our judiciary, by using national security as an excuse, right? Because once national security dominates the judicial branch of government, that's an executive agency. That is a complete violation of the checks and balances system, right? So let's get justice back, and let's get the national security agencies out of our courts, so our courts can once again become finders of fact, which is their role.
Well, and you guys, now that you've got this bully pulpit, I mean, that's got to be something else that the Trump administration does, because it's over CISA and these other agencies. So, it's, right now I'm writing articles and urging the Trump administration, I had one come out today, to investigate all the election fraud here in Arizona. But we need to have that second prong that you guys keep pointing out, which is he needs to get these out of control federal agencies under control. Because most people never talk about CISA. I wouldn't have talked about it unless you started hammering it.
Well, here's my big concern, and this should concern Democrats all over the world, wherever you vote from, right? Because a lot of people in the Trump administration might be thinking, well, they can use these institutions for that purpose, so can we. And fraud is fraud. It's wrong. It doesn't matter who's doing it, right?
Absolutely.
But if Democrats can do it to Republicans, Republicans can do it to Democrats.
Right.
So.
Demand that the NGOs be eliminated from our election system. That is huge. I mean, even under current recorder Justin Heap, right? Justin Heap is supposed to be America First. He's a Republican recorder. I still don't want him hiring NGOs to come in and meddle in our election.
Right.
That is not fair. and we're going to fight that no matter who's on, who's the elected officer shouldn't matter.
Right.
The bureaucratic system and the nonprofit system that's been put in place is anti-American. And Democrats and Republicans alike should be fighting a system where the bureaucrats control everything.
And with that, do you have a last word?
I guess I would just say I wanted to piggyback on what Shelby said, which is that we've been running bills in the state legislature since 2012 to get rid of the mandatory bar, but there's always some rhino that defeated it. And finally, we get one bill that passes, and of course, the alleged governor, Katie Hobbs, vetoed it. But if Andy Biggs becomes our next governor, he's the one who started championing the bills in the state legislature to get rid of the state bar. So if he gets in office, I think it might finally happen.
Right. And with that, peace.